So hi everyone, my name is Sarah Hay, working with COSEBOC on this great project. This is our webinar for the Mississippi Leadership Academy. So before we start, let's do a little housekeeping just to make sure everybody knows how to use this technology. If you cannot hear me, so you must call in and log into the website. So as you can read here, if you can't hear me, please call in now. There's going to be a Q&A to follow the presentation. You can send us questions via the chat section, the little bubble on the right where you see the people symbol, and then there's the hand symbol. It's the bubble to the right. So send your questions to us, and we will try to get to all of them at the end of the presentation. And by us, I mean the Q&A group. Please mute yourself so that we can have better quality recording. And you can mute yourself by using the *6. You can also use the mute button on your phone if that's easier for you. And then last, we're actually going to get a great video of Dr. McKinley talking to us while she flips through her slides so we can get a better sense of who she is and where she is. And in order to view the video, please click on the plus sign next to video and then click watch video. So right now there's not a video feed, but you can at least go ahead and enable that for yourself. And following this presentation, you're going to be given an opportunity to give us some feedback so we can continue to make this a great quality product for you all and support you in your school leadership. And there will be a link to go to a survey. So if you could kindly fill those out, we could always use new feedback from all of you as you experience this webinar. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Ron Walker, who is with COSEBOC, and we'll just talk a little bit about COSEBOC.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon to everyone on the line. Good afternoon to all of the members of the Mississippi Leadership Academy. I am so very honored and happy to have an opportunity to introduce this webinar by introducing COSEBOC, the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. We are an organization that's 7 years old, and the mission of the organization, the mission of Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color, is to connect, inspire, support, and strengthen school leaders who are dedicated to the social, emotional, and academic development of boys and young men of color. And we see this as being the major issue on the educational landscape. As an organization, we are dedicated and determined to increase the positive outcomes and positive trajectories for boys and young men of color. So the Mississippi Leadership Academy, which is funded and supported by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, is our first opportunity to really scale up these beliefs and mission statement into a concrete entity within the state of Mississippi. We're excited about what's going on. Our project director, Mr. Sean Van, has recruited 29 school leaders, elementary leaders, as well as early childhood directors to be part of the first cohort of participants engaging with the Mississippi Leadership Academy. And so this first webinar is the first in a series of 6 webinars that will bring high quality professional development to the eyes and ears of people in the field, specifically in Mississippi. And we're so happy to have Dr. McKinley, who will be our first presenter. And so on behalf of the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color, I want to welcome again all the participants and members of the Mississippi Leadership Academy. I do look forward to meeting you in the very near future. I support and encourage the work and efforts that you're doing currently to make sure and to ensure that our boys and young men are achieving the best possible education that we can give them. So I'm going to introduce now our project director, Mr. Sean Van, who will do the honors of introducing Dr. Johnnie McKinley. Sean?
Good evening, and welcome, colleagues, to our...
Okay, so we're having some technical difficulties. Dr. McKinley, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, great. We can hear you too. Why don't we go ahead and move on to you. Dr. McKinley is our esteemed presenter today, and we can send you all sorts of information on her credentials if you want to know more about her and her background. But we are absolutely honored to have her speak today on behalf of COSEBOC.
Okay, thank you. I want to greet you all, and I'm very pleased to present to the Mississippi Leadership Academy today. I'm going to be talking about raising Black student achievement through culturally responsive teaching and learning. And I'd like to start my presentation with this song from way back when, Ain't No Stopping Us Out Now, We're on the Move. I like to use this song because we know what we need to do in order to move our children forward academically. And I'd like to present to you what some folks have done in order to make changes for children of color and particularly African American students. There's just 3 parts of our agenda. I'm going to share with you some of the strategies that folks have indicated to me through my research. I'm going to share a model for teaming for culturally responsive teaching and learning in classrooms so that you can expand the use of what these 55 educators did in their classrooms and their schools throughout your school. And I'll show you a technique called teaming that'll allow you also to make this commitment to using those strategies in your schools and in your classrooms. The other item of interest to us now, and we're hearing a lot about that, is the Common Core Standards. I was part of a group who did the first bias and sensitivity review for the Common Core Standards. Bias and sensitivity review is an activity that I've done for a number of districts and educational service areas serving 30 school districts in the state of Washington, and for the entire state. We did a bias and sensitivity review of the Common Core Standards. And so I'm going to share some of the learnings from that with you. So we've got a lot to get through, and we're going to be just moving along because we know what to do. The culturally responsive pedagogy is something that lots of folks have been interested in. The model that I use for thinking about how we will go forward is to explore, compare, and develop and share strategies. And as we explore, other folks have done this kind of exploration before. There's studies from numbers of years before. One of them was done by a researcher, Dr. Goodwin, who studied over 300 research reports on disproportionality and how some children actually are not doing well and what was behind that. And what came of that is a set of recommendations as to what educators can do to change teaching and learning in their schools. And one of the things that Dr. Goodwin looked at was this complex network of economic and societal and educational strategies and factors that were contributing. For one thing, he said that there were weak, inappropriate, and inadequate curricula for children of color. There was little support from home. There were disparities between the school and the families and children who came to the school. Those disparities made a difference. Teachers' attitudes and beliefs make a difference. And that is what guides student motivation and their identification with their teachers. There were different conditions in place for children who were children of color, special education students, students who identified with different cultural groups. All of these kinds of things contributed to what became known as disproportionality in the school. One of the educators who I interviewed for the study that I did said that from experience, we know that many African American children come to school and they see it as a place where they aren't meant to be successful. And of course that is not what we would want for them to believe or to experience, but that is the history. What we are talking about when we talk about culturally responsive pedagogy or teaching and learning has some big ideas that we need to agree on. And one of the big ideas is that culturally situated pedagogies that address race, culture, class, and gender actually make a difference. A number of folks have said that there is a need for this. And what people talk about when they're talking about culture is different in a lot of settings. And what we mean by culture is that there are these demographic differences that are apparent in large populations, and it comes from a long history. It may be related to their language or their dialect and distinctive ways of life. The reason that this is important to us is that there are unique pedagogies that emerge when you consider and affirm the differences that are there among students and teachers and administrators when you look at their race, culture, language, social class, gender, and handicap. When you look at those things, you actually will attend to them by creating a unique way of teaching and learning. Lots of folks have said that. What came out of Goodwin's research is that there are several disciplines that can help us understand how to make teaching and learning culturally responsive. We learn from cognitive psychology that there is a relationship between learning styles and culture. Effective instruction and assessment should attend to that. We know that from sociology of education, that positive interactions that are between teachers and learners can make a big difference. We know from educational anthropology that schools are a culture unto themselves and that they're different from the communities in which our children live and thrive. And so we have to create a kind of cultural congruence between students' background and this context that we have for learning in our school. We know from social psychology that there's some adaptation that occurs when students are in schools and doing well, that there's something in the environment, the setting, and the relationships that contributes to motivation and students' perceptions of themselves. Most importantly, we know that constructive teacher attitudes and beliefs can nurture students' motivation. And we're looking at this in terms of not only just students of color, but particularly looking at this from the perspective of African American boys or boys of color. There is a pattern that social activists said that we need to address. And that pattern is that there are differences in terms of the expectations, conditions, and practices, and most importantly, the opportunity to learn. And schools need to take a social activist approach to those, to address those, and to remove those barriers to children doing the best they can and achieving at their highest level. The information that I'm sharing with you is information that I've shared at over 70 conferences in the U.S. and in Canada. These have been regional conferences, statewide conferences, national and international conferences, and you can see the list here. This is a partial listing. Of course, this is not 70 conferences, but I just wanted to point out the various places and various audiences at which I've presented this. In addition, my research that I'm presenting and that I've included in 2 books on closing achievement gaps for African American students has been nominated for 2 international research awards, the National Staff Development Council Award and the American Educational Research Association Award. If you want to do a little bit of digging, you could find the research and a Journal of Staff Development article that I wrote and it was a journal issue that was focused on closing the achievement gap. The article points out some of the particular strategies that folks felt were absolutely essential to closing the black-white achievement gap, and you'll be seeing that presentation here today. One of the most powerful things that I've found in doing my research, in which teachers talk about, and which it seems to connect with the COSEBOC philosophy as well, is that teachers who make a big difference in children's lives have an understanding of their children's background. They acknowledge, as John Polloy says here, that racism exists, and they let their kids know that they are aware of these aspects of their lives and their educational careers. What's most particularly different about these teachers, and I call them the PTP teachers, that is proving the possible instead of concentrating on what was negative or what could not happen, they talked to their children about what was possible, and they changed their methods based on their belief, their philosophy about what they thought could happen with children. John Pulloy said that he lets the students know that here is different. This is someone who actually divided his classroom. He was a middle school mathematics teacher who divided his classroom by gender. So girls sat on one side of the room and boys on the other. We know a lot of folks have set up gender-specific schools. Pulloy had this belief early on. He was a unique person in his classroom, in his school, because his was the only classroom that was set up that way. This model of efficacy and this belief and philosophy about what they could do is apparent in Larry Young's remarks as well. Larry Young came to teaching from a successful career with one of our local aerospace companies here in Washington State, and after having made a successful career there, he decided that he wanted to go into teaching. And he says that the key to the most effective practices in classroom was doing what we knew was best to meet all the kids' needs. He said that he had studied the classrooms in the area where he worked, in the city where this aerospace company was located, and he said that he saw what was being done in the classrooms for those children who were called highly capable or gifted. And he says that his philosophy is that you just roll with the best practice. What they did for gifted kids, what he did for gifted kids, he did for the regular kids. One of the unique persons in the classrooms that I examined was Keisha Scarlett. She's now a school administrator, and she had some really insightful remarks to make about children's relationships and the power of relationships between teachers and students. She said that she established relationships early on with her kids, giving them lots of what she called closet time or conferences with them one-on-one. She said that when students got into trouble, she didn't put them out in the hallway outside of her classroom, but she extended extra care to them outside the classroom, spending time with them at lunch, offering pep talks. And she said that she figured out that if they did something well, she was going to commend them for that during these pep talks, and that was going to be her way to, one of the ways she connected with them. One of the most powerful statements she said is that if you care about students, they will perform for you. Other teachers in the classrooms where I looked, the 22 teachers and 55 people in the examination of the study, said this about them. The students are looking for someone to care for them. And if you do care, they will perform. Keisha said, my relationship with them is something they're looking for. So as though this philosophy of efficacy says that I have something that they want, and they have something that that I want. I want to have a relationship with them. I want to extend to them caring beyond what's actually the minimum or what would be the norm, and to make sure that they succeed. These teachers were unique in their district. The students were as well. This is Barbara Mann, who taught in a classroom with special education students. And with her special education students, she created learning plans for them so that they would achieve the goals and objectives that she would expect for all the students. Here's a classroom where you can see along the wall the 6 traits writing standards are indicated. 6 traits writing standards rock is what the board says, and these students are learning to achieve high standards. In Larry Young's classroom, it was really interesting because his classroom was one, his building was shaped like a dome, and there was a lot of space in the up above his classroom. he had like 1/6 of a circle for his classroom, and he had to use technology to make himself heard because there were no walls in the school. And so you see him using PowerPoint here to get information across to his students. You see him here putting a microphone in front of a student's face. They are doing a scientific experiment, which is a highly challenging activity. And he makes sure that they understand each other and that they're able to hear by using that microphone as he walks around. Here he is coming around to a student who is going to describe how sedimentation occurs in the science experiment that they're doing. Again, he's using his mic. You can see his mic there right in front of her face. This way kids can hear, their literacy is developed, their attention to each other is developed, and everybody gets the information they need to succeed. One of the things that these teachers did is that they made sure that the students took on the role of teacher. And here you can see one of the classrooms where teacher Ellenbach is helping a group of students become teacher leaders for this time. One of the things that Teacher Gaynor did with his classroom is that he was teaching about U.S. history to a group of fourth graders. They were learning about how life was lived in 17th century U.S. And one of the things they did to understand the lifestyle was to build replicas of towns. And since they were doing perspective drawing, he first talked about the word perspective. And then he took them outside to help them understand what perspective meant. Then they went back into the classroom, and they're doing perspective drawings of buildings in this village. And afterwards, they were going to make life-size models of these perspectives so that they could replicate a 17th century town. Here in Keisha Scarlett's classroom, students are given the power to decide what their own learning will be. The students decided that they wanted to make a commemoration to U.S. astronauts. And so here the kids are doing the research on individuals who are astronauts, and then she's having conferences with them. Notice she's up close and comfortable with them. She is chatting with them about the notes that they've written about the person's background and their contribution to NASA, and then confirming with each student what it is that they're going to be presenting. You see somebody has their presentation paper in their hand, and then students made presentations to the group. The issue here is that the children have decided what it is that they wanted to learn, and you can see along the wall here that these are the standards in Washington State. So what Keisha Scarlett did was to have students address these standards, but through a project that they chose. In another classroom, we see this is a group of third graders, and here is a student up at the front of the classroom teaching about the daily oral language, terms that they're being studied. And here we see Jeff McKenzie's class. These are 8th graders who are learning algebra. They're learning how to solve equations that have multiple variables in them. Like what's done in some of the Japanese classrooms, instead of bombarding kids with a lot of problems, these students are learning to solve one problem, the one problem that's on the board there. In addition to focusing on solving something and learning it deeply and learning it well, McKenzie had kids to rely upon each other in small groups. And here you can see him coaching a group, giving them hints, giving them guidelines as to what to follow. The other piece that you can see here in the interactions is that they're having fun. But this young lady that has her head down, it has been chosen to do the teaching of this lesson. They're using something called reciprocal teaching, where teachers and students learn together. And so at the end of the work period, McKenzie goes up to the board and the student and he solve this problem together with her taking the lead. Reciprocal teaching has been indicated as a strategy that makes a big difference in terms of students learning because they are teaching the content and they learn it well that way. The study that I did on these people included the 20 principals, 31 teachers we started out with, 28 people with videotapes in their classroom. There were surveys, they were observed in the classroom, there were interviews, and then a complex analysis was done on the feedback and the observations from the surveys and observing the videos and from the interview data. I had a professor at Seattle University to tell me that you can say just about anything that you want when people conduct a study, and then when people have interviews, they'll tell you pretty much anything that you want. And so it's possible for you to get it all wrong. This cartoon over here shows this little lady who has gotten it all wrong about youth fashion. She said, you must be really proud of all the weight you've lost. I could have left with misunderstandings about what was going on in classrooms, but the data analysis that I conducted using descriptive statistics as well as multiple analysis of variance and discriminant analysis that told me differences between the principal group and the teacher group, doing classification analysis that showed me the further differences between those, and then doing conceptual analysis of the keywords in interviews, and then conducting t-tests on observations of activities in the classroom, gave me a strong sense of what was going on in these classrooms. The outcome is 40 strategies to which you can compare what you do in your classroom. The analysis showed that teachers had strong ability to design their curriculum and assessment, that they use multicultural approaches to instructional design, with a strong focus on using cultural competency in their interactions with students and maintaining active participation by the student. Creating teacher and student interactions that relied on that cultural competency, used relevant curriculum materials and curriculum for the students, having meaningful and challenging curriculum. The activities I've shown you when I talked about the teachers showed that they were challenging students, but it was meaningful for the students as well. And they're responding to students' traits and needs using cooperative group strategies and having clear expectations and setting those and maintaining them for mastery. The interactions between students and teachers was very important. Students and teachers remarked on how the relationships that they established in their classroom relied on fairness and respect. There was low favoritism, lots of caring, low friction in the classroom. There was high engagement and low apathy. Kids cared about what was going on. The assessments that they used were assessments that allowed them to capture students' performance in lots of different ways, using performances and observations, and using those to augment standardized tests. The work that I've done has been sharing what these people do in a couple of books that you might be familiar with. One is a planning book that allows you to plan how you're going to integrate these strategies into what you do. So there is the exploring what those strategies are, and comparing them to what you do. This book also allows you to plan how you will share and compare and develop the strategies in your own school as well. The most recent book gives you an idea of more close and in-depth presentations of what goes on in the classroom. So you get a chance to meet the teachers and the principals and get their perspective, hear from them what it is that they did and why it made a difference in their classroom. As a leader, there are some issues to be concerned about in terms of culturally responsive pedagogy. Several folks have focused on this, how this attention to a culturally responsive pedagogy is a leadership responsibility. There are institutional issues that come out. There's the personal side of the cognitive and emotional relationships that students have with teachers. And then there's the instructional piece. All of these are issues that are the concern of leaders in schools. How do you make those, how do you address those issues? There are three things that you might do. The organization of your school structure should reflect the diversity of the classroom. The space in your building, the way that classrooms are arranged, and the way that you plan the school should reflect a cultural interest and attend to the differences that students bring and nourish those and develop them. Policies and procedures can be put in place. We saw the research by Goodman that there were 300 some odd reports that said that there were policies that we put in place that actually do not help the children achieve in terms of different practices based on ability or opportunity to learn and access to services and access to instruction. Policies and procedures are those things that leaders are responsible for and can make a difference in terms of addressing the needs of students from diverse backgrounds. One of the most powerful things that leaders can do is to involve the community, the families of the folks who are in our schools, in what goes on in school. Particularly of interest in the work that is going on in Seattle is an alignment process where school activities are aligned to activities with families to bring them on board to what students need to know and be able to do, and help them support what goes on in school, at home, throughout all the grades, and to bring families into the school as not only knowledgeable advocates for their kids, but for folks who can support and address the learning that goes on in school. So we've got this model, explore, compare, and develop and share in the Teaming for Culturally Responsive Classroom. You can learn about research and practices such as I've shared with you just now. The other thing that you can do is collect data on your current practices to find out where you are and what you're doing. And you can compare your practices and your policies and strategies, as we just talked about, to what research says works and changes what goes on in school for kids. There are some tools in my book. One is an assessment of all of the 10 areas that were indicated in my research. This is an example of one. And what people do is that they take a look at this assessment and say, how often are we doing this in our classroom? How effective is this with our children of color? Are you having folks teach the cultural, historical, socio-ethnic, and linguistic differences? Are you scaffolding instruction to match what's going on in the school to children's homes, their culture, their interests, and their experience, as Keisha Scarlett did with her NASA astronauts project? Are you scaffolding so that students learn and use familiar vocabulary, connecting their prior learning with new learning, as teacher Gaynor did with his kids who were learning about perspective and perspective drawings and learning how to construct a community of the 17th century. Are you making visual connections between prior learning and new learning? One of the things we know that visuals are one of the most powerful ways that we take in information and that we process it. So are we using those other channels so that we scaffold instruction to the home culture and students' language? That's what cultural congruence is about. And this is another one of the tools that you'll find in my book. You'll see that it allows you not only to think about the frequency that a strategy is observed, but you also can make notes here about how you're going to go forward with your reflection and observation in the classroom and or collaboration. One of the ways that you can collaborate in your schools is through a walkthrough. These areas have been the ones over the years that folks have asked me most about conducting walkthroughs. And these are classroom observations. And in the book, there's a chapter that explains how you do this. You might be familiar with these already. But the issues that people were most interested in are about expectations and creating equity, creating an academic and social context for learning that supports the children, aligning assessment and instruction for students with culturally responsive ways of doing that, as well as being sensitive about fairness, creating cultural congruence, which we just talked about, and then including reciprocal teaching and powerful strategies such as cooperative learning, and using graphic organizers and visual ways and multiple channels for enhancing learning. There's also a tool in the book, and you have this tool here, which is a short version that shows you how to conduct walkthroughs in your classroom. Basically getting smart about what's going on in your school, comparing people's strategies in the classroom to what you read about in research or see in other successful classrooms, and then thinking about ways to expand those strategies throughout your school. Here you see one of the teachers, Jeff McKinley, whom we looked at before, and you can see that he is using this cooperative group strategy in his classroom with these 8th graders who were actually in a school for bilingual orientation, but these students are learning algebra at the 8th grade. A lot of times people will expect to see the same kind of outcomes they've seen in the past. You see a school bus, and the door opens, the light comes on, they start blinking, the stop sign comes out, and you think you know what's going to happen. A lot of times, though, you can get results that are quite unexpected. And you might not have expected buses out of buses, but one of the things that you need to look at is that some of the educators in your building will find that practices that I've been discussing, the ones that people can use in their, that can examine in their walkthroughs and use throughout their buildings, are ones they're already using. And that's kind of an unexpected that I found for some people. Developing new practices and strategies and putting those in action when you finish your walkthroughs, finish your talks, and go through a process in your school to build through the exploring, comparing, developing, and sharing is one way that has been used throughout the U.S. Particularly, there were funded projects in Canada and the U.S. to improve reading instruction that are very similar to what I'm sharing with you here, that were supportive of making great changes in what students learned in school. So it's something to think about as a model. Here we see the reciprocal teaching, which I mentioned to you before. This slide offers you a process for working in groups or in content areas to examine what you're doing in your classroom, work together to revise or learn or create learning activities, decide on the changes that you want to see, try these out, and then look for changes in students' performance and engagement. The most important thing, the key, is getting smart together. These two scientists are very surprised to see the side of the glass on which the chemicals that they're protecting themselves from are on. So we can make big mistakes if we don't work together, bottom line. This place to start indicates that these are the strategies that teachers and principals agreed upon most in terms of effectiveness. And I've gone through those with you. But if you're looking for a kind of comprehensive view of where we can start, take a look at this slide when you are finished with the webinar and when you're back in your schools talking about what it is that we can do. There are some implications about what contributed most to teachers' learning. We talked about the fact that they had this belief system. They had a philosophy. One of the most influential activities was what you plan to do and what COSEBOC is all about, which is making those cultural responses to children's background, their race, culture, gender, and their prior learning and those styles of learning. You can see the mouse has gotten through this maze and gone through the cheese, and they didn't go through the lanes. There were some breakthroughs, and this is a breakthrough for us. We don't have to go through a lot of lanes and work as if we're in a maze. There's some strategies that work, some that are proven to work. One of them is the issue of self-efficacy, people having a very deep belief that they can make positive changes in student achievement, holding high expectations for students and telling them that those high expectations are held, providing the support students need to achieve the tasks and standards. One of the things that I saw in the papers, the Seattle Times, in December of 2011, is that one of the schools where I had done my study, in which there were 7 teachers in one school who were included in the study, and that was unusual because most of the schools had 1 or 2, perhaps 4 teachers at most who were indicated for the study because their students had closed black-white achievement gaps on standardized tests. One of the schools had 7 teachers in it, and it seems that from reading this December 2011 Seattle Times article that not only were those 7 teachers using the supports that students needed to achieve the tasks and standards, but the entire school had taken on using the strategies that those 7 teachers had been using. One particular one was that they were using technology in their classrooms, like Larry Young did, using the PowerPoint and the microphone and using web podcasts for teaching and learning. These teachers were all using a system called Prometheus, which allowed interactive teaching and learning with a student response, a module, and with a whiteboard in each one of the classrooms. The bottom line is that these folks used these cultural responsive pedagogies that were really grounded in their students' differences to maximize their learning and to converge achievement gaps. One of the issues that's of most importance now to a lot of educators is the Common Core State Standards. I've seen a lot of literature on the Common Core State Standards and how they may contribute to students' learning. Washington State was the first state in the union that required a bias and sensitivity review of the Common Core Standards. And a group called Relevant Strategies hired me as a subcontractor to develop a design for and facilitate and write a technical report on what folks in Washington State believed were a fair and equitable implementation of the Common Core Standards. And so in June 2011, we conducted that review, and the process involved a discussion of current research and collection of recommendations for the standards and how they would be used. A lot of the review had to do with how the standards could be used by considering race, ethnicity, and culture, sex, gender, religion, and age group, and disability and socioeconomic status. What was intriguing is that much of the review process came out with some traits that are very similar to what was indicated in the research that I conducted on people who closed the black-white achievement gap. There's some school traits that came out, as well as teacher traits that came out. You can see the similarities in what was indicated in this review. Access to rigorous standards and opportunities to learn, allowing all children to have access to the standards, holding highest expectations, using culturally responsive teaching and learning, and drawing on the home and the community. And you're saying, well, we already said that. So you can see the similarities here. One of the things that came out is that successful implementation using the Common Core standards would mean that there was relying on the diversity in the classroom, developing instructional approaches that had been successful, fostering exposure to multicultural images, and the craft and the perspective and points of views of practitioners from different backgrounds and cultures. A lot of this is what we've seen before and which you will also see in the standards that have been developed by COSEBOC. Access to technology, which I've mentioned before, avoiding bias and stereotypical representation. A really powerful one, helping students to discuss and address emotional reactions they have to bias. Finally, the recommendation was to use students' cultural heritage and their personal stories and English and their home language as we develop their understanding of content and skills knowledge, and ensuring equitable and adequate time to learn in the classroom, ensuring that students and learners are supported throughout their academic career, and using some of those strategies that we mentioned before that really are tied to transferring knowledge. As we come to the end of this discussion, I want to point out to you that there's some resources that you might want to take a look at as you're having conversations. The report that we conducted in the Bias and Sensitivity Review for the State of Washington is available on the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction's website. There is one for the English Language and Mathematics, K through 12, and there's also one for the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developing Skills, which is used as a tool to help folks get smart about where kids are when they come into school. There are two books there that I've written on what we learned when we look at what teachers and principals and schools do when they address the black-white achievement gap. And looking forward, a colleague of mine at the University of Washington and I are developing a book for Columbia University Press, which deals with diversity and classroom assessment, a big issue for students of color and a big issue for African American students as we look at what we can do in order to level the playing field when we address assessment in children of color. It's been a pleasure talking with you and sharing these insights with you. I look forward to further discussion with you, and I hope that you're able to use this as you explore, compare, develop, and share your desired strategies in your school. Thank you.
I would like to close by thanking Dr. McKinley for outstanding work and also for sharing information with us as we move forward in our endeavors of improving student achievement. I'd like to further take this information and thank the participants that signed in, that participated in this webinar. The webinar will be posted on YouTube, and we have our next webinar to follow. We with Alfred Tatum on January the 29th. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for what we do and what you're doing with children to increase the self-efficacy of black and brown boys of color. Thank you.